Summer 1945. The Pacific sun bleeds into the horizon. A war that devoured continents is dying, but its last victims are only just waking up to a reality they never imagined. The wooden platform creaked under weary feet. Dust hung in a scorching haze. A group of Japanese women, some barely in their 20s, others middle-aged with deep lines carved by hunger and loss, stood in stunned silence. Before them were men unlike any they'd been told existed. Not beasts, not monsters, but soldiers, clean-shaven, calm, with packs of cigarettes and small tins of chocolate. No fury in their eyes, no cries of hate, just a quiet, unflinching humanity. One woman, barely able to speak, whispered in disbelief, "Are these even real men?" And in that question, raw, aching, confused, lay the collapse of a lifetime of fear and propaganda. To understand that moment, we must travel back a decade, to the roots of a war that seemed to consume not just lands, but the souls of those it touched. In the 1930s, Japan, an island nation fiercely proud and painfully isolated, was gripped by nationalist fervor. Military leaders spoke of destiny, sacrifice, and divine mission. They promised that the emperors would shape a new Asia, free from Western influence. Yet beneath this grand rhetoric was fear. Fear of humiliation. Fear of being eclipsed by the industrial might of America and Europe. On December 7, 1941, that fear exploded into history. The Japanese Imperial Navy struck Pearl Harbor in the early Hawaiian dawn. Within minutes, battleships burned, airfields were decimated, and the world, as they knew it, changed forever. America, once distant, was now fully at war. From the jungles of the Philippines to the beaches of Guadalcanal, from the sweltering heat of New Guinea to the typhoon-battered islands of Okinawa, the conflict rapidly grew into the bloodiest war human history had ever known. Yet behind the slogans and the battle lines was something deeper, a divide not just of nations, but a belief. The Japanese people were taught that surrender was worse than death, that the enemy was inhuman, cruel, and merciless. This was drilled into every schoolchild, every soldier, every mother and daughter. A war of steel became a war of the mind. The first attacks shattered nations and illusions alike. When Japanese forces stormed through Southeast Asia and Pacific, shock turned to awe and then to terror. Local populations were overwhelmed. Battles erupted in remote atolls and great cities alike. Across the ocean, ordinary Americans, farmers, factory workers, teachers, students, suddenly found themselves in uniform. They trained, they fought, they lost friends. The war was no longer a distant headline. It was personal. Yet for most Americans, the enemy remained faceless. For most Japanese, the American soldier was a monster myth, a creature of propaganda born from fear rather than truth. These false images hardened over years of rationing, of posters, of stories about what the Yankee dogs would do if they ever stepped on Japanese soil. And then, in the last grim months of the war, it happened. The battlefields of the Pacific shrank. Island by island, Allied forces advanced. Many Japanese soldiers fought to the death, not because they believed in victory, but because surrender was unthinkable. Civilians were dragged into the maelstrom. Women, sisters, daughters, mothers, found themselves caught where no woman should ever be caught, on the front lines of collapse. Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, hell made flesh. These names became synonymous with slaughter. At Tarawa, thousands fell under blazing suns and relentless gunfire. On Saipan, families hid in caves to escape bombardment, only to be driven deeper into despair. At Iwo Jima, the iconic flag raising belied a graveyard of shattered men. Across these battles, the U.S. Marine Corps and Army fought with grim determination. Each bloody island assault came at an unbearable cost on both sides. Thousands of American lives were lost, and hundreds of thousands of Japanese lives, military and civilian, were extinguished. Eventually, by mid-1945, the balance of power was undeniable. The Allies had air superiority, naval dominance, and a strategy of relentless pressure. The Japanese home islands were within reach. Cities were firebombed. The civilian population was starving. Hope was fading. Then came the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Two flashes, one on August 6th, one on August 9th, and an empire staggered. Emperor Hirohito announced surrender on August 15th, 1945. For the first time, ordinary Japanese people heard that the war was over, and millions of souls began to confront a world they did not recognize. Imagine growing up in a society taught that the enemy would torture you, desecrate your honor, and kill without mercy, simply for being who you were. Japanese propaganda, woven through newspapers, classrooms, and radio broadcasts, instilled this fear in every heart. Dissent was unthinkable. Obedience was survival. Soldiers were raised to fight without question. Civilians were urged to endure, to sacrifice, to remain loyal. Women bore the burden silently. With husbands and sons at the front, women kept homes together. They rationed rice, scoured fields for roots, prayed for news that never came. In every village, every port town, the war whispered in every empty bowl and every tear-soaked pillow. Captured, but not broken. In the final turbulent weeks, the United States military began encountering hundreds of surrendering Japanese civilians, men, yes, but also women and children who had been caught by the sweeping advance. Many had endured months of hunger and shelling. Some had hidden in caves for days. Others had witnessed the death of loved ones. When they finally emerged, surrendered, or captured, they expected death. They expected brutality. They expected the horror their leaders had prepared them for. Instead, they saw something utterly alien. Calm, order, with compassion. American soldiers offered what little they had. Food, water, medical attention, blankets, even cigarettes and chocolate. Luxuries many Japanese civilians had not seen in months. For Japanese POWs, soldiers who were finally taken into custody, the shock was profound. Many expected torture or execution. Instead, they were fed, questioned respectfully, and guarded by troops who treated them in accordance with the Geneva Conventions, often better than they had been treated by their own supply shortages and disease. Some POWs later said that they were astonished that their captors were human at all. But for Japanese women, raised in a culture that valorized male honor and demonized the enemy, the experience was even more jarring. They had been told stories of brutal Americans who cut down anyone in their path, who lingered over enemy corpses, who showed no mercy. Yet here stood men who offered blankets to shivering mothers, water to parched daughters, simple kindness in a world torn apart. One Japanese woman, trembling with exhaustion, reached out to accept a chocolate bar, a symbol of so much she had been denied during years of rationing. When an American soldier placed it in her hand with a gentle smile, she could not believe her senses. Another woman later recalled how she watched American medics tend to wounded civilians, even those who had fought for the Japanese cause, with a care she never thought possible. They looked like ordinary men, she said years later, and not even angry at us. August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered. The conflict that had ravaged oceans and continents finally came to an end. For many Japanese women who had survived bombing, starvation, and fear, the end was not a victory, it was bewilderment. What did it mean to pick up the pieces of a shattered nation? What did it mean to live when survival had become the only task left? U.S. occupation forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, entered Japan under strict orders to demilitarize, democratize, and rebuild. Former enemies were now guardians of peace. Yet peace did not feel peaceful to those who had lost everything. Cities lay in ruins. Families were torn apart. Trust was fragile. Some Japanese women tried to return a normal life, raising children, tending rice fields, trying to forget the endless nights of air raid sirens and hunger. Others, broken by loss, never fully recovered. Across the islands, millions mourned. Across the Pacific, millions remembered. The story of these Japanese women, shocked to their core the first time they saw American soldiers, is not just about war. It is a story of fear and humanity, of myth and reality, of what happens when a lens of hatred is shattered by truth. They had been taught that Americans were monsters, but when they saw them, really saw them, they saw something else. Broken men and women trying to end a war that had destroyed them too. A world where compassion was possible even after carnage, where a stranger's hand could offer a warm meal instead of a bullet, and where In the ruins of an empire, the first fragile seeds of peace could begin to take root. War teaches us who we are, but peace shows us who we can become. And at that moment, when they asked, "Are these even real men?" humanity answered back,